Hey everyone, my name is Charlie, and today I have my November wrap-up for you. Obviously, we're wearing the hat because the hair's a bit of a mess today, and frankly, short hair takes just as much work as long hair apparently. The first book that I read in November was Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods by Tishani Doshi. This is a poetry collection, and this is bloody fantastic. I finished this book for the Autumn Cozy Reading Night run by Lauren over at Lauren and the Books, and I really enjoyed it. It was a great way to spend the first hour of reading. The poems in here discuss femininity, what it means to be a woman. They discuss life, they discuss a different life than the usual Western view that we get to see often. And there were parts in here that I didn't understand, but it was a completely different type of life, a different type of culture that I haven't experienced before. I think that the poet discussed a lot of topics that are quite prominent in our culture today, and that this is a collection that a lot of people ought to seek out. Next, I listened to The Gender Games by Juno Dawson. I have a video about that in which I'm rambling about my questions related to gender. This book doesn't answer any of the questions that I had regarding gender anyway, and I didn't go into this expecting it would. I just expected to maybe try and cement my own thoughts, and this book did a good job of that. Personally, I think that a lot more people should be reading this book because this is another big topic nowadays, and I think that Juno writes in such an accessible fashion that if people are perhaps struggling with their gender or would like to know more, make themselves more knowledgeable, more insightful, which I think we all ought to try and do anyway, then I think that this is a great starting point to read. It also happens to be quite a hilarious, moving memoir as well. I finished The Museum of Innocence by Orhan Pamuk, and this is one of the greatest novels that I have ever read in my life. A few years ago, I read a book in which the author was talking about their craft, and I disagreed with the author on many of the points they made regarding their own writing and how they go about writing, and they mentioned Anna Karenina a lot. I feel like The Museum of Innocence is Orhan Pamuk's own version of Anna Karenina, set in Istanbul, and it follows the character of Kemal, who develops an attraction to Füsun, a woman who is 12 years his junior. He is engaged to another woman named Sibel. You can imagine all of the drama that's going to arise from there. Kemal is a character that I despised. I think that he makes the incredibly poor decisions, but that is exactly what makes for a brilliant, fascinating narrative. This book is 723 pages in length, and I do feel as though the last 50 pages could have been cut. I do feel as though the author became too involved in the story towards the end. However, the entire narrative as a whole is just fantastic. There is experimentation in here. There is a scene within this novel in which I was reading and I began to feel this overwhelming sense of sadness. And I realised that the character had never actually explicitly stated they were sad in that point. It was just their actions and the language that was used was able to evoke such an emotion within me as a reader that I couldn't help but applaud the writing. And I suppose that should also that's also down to his translator, Maureen Freely. I believe from Abercrombie that she has translated earlier works of the authors as well. And you'd think that a tale about something we have seen before, a older gentleman, well, he's not older, a 30-something-year-old gentleman falling in love with a teenager, we've seen it before, we know how it's going to end. You think that it'd be done, you think that it's oversaturated in the market, but the way that it is written here is just fantastic, which really also goes to show readers who may possibly want to be writers in future, if you are ever struggling with wanting to write something because you know that there's another book similar, if you have the passion in your writing and you have your own individual voice, which you definitely do, then you really ought to give it a go. Next, I read The Rebel by Albert Camus. I have a video about this as well, in which I discussed the fact that I didn't get it at all. I have since spoken to Abercrombie, and she and I talked about it, and in the discussion I realised that maybe I was going into this book looking for quotable philosophy because of the way I'm reading as a modern reader, and that is what a lot of our non-fiction books do nowadays. When, in actual fact, what I should have been looking at was that Camus was presenting us with a history, and that perhaps not getting anything out of this book is exactly what I was supposed to get out of this book. I question whether it's just a book that's too late for me, and whether what Camus is questioning, I'm used to a lot of people questioning things straight away anyway nowadays. I believe it's the world in which we live, but I feel like rebels are now called liberals. So I don't know where I'm supposed to go from here, really. Abercrombie has lent me another book in which I can read a chapter about the rebel, see it deconstructed, and see whether that can inspire any more thought about the book. But for now, I enjoy the prose, I enjoy the way Camus writes. I didn't know much about this book and what it was talking about, but I think that if you are into your philosophy, if you like Camus, then maybe it's a book to go out and read. Next, I read Eureka by Anthony Quinn. This is a sort of sequel to his book Freya, which indeed was a sort of sequel to his book Curtain Call. This book is set in the 1960s and follows the writer of Nat Fane, who we met in the book Freya. Nat is now a struggling writer after writing some good films a few years prior to the events of this book, and here he is being tasked with writing a modern adaptation of a book by Henry James. We also have the story of Billy, who is a woman in a sort of almost abusive relationship who is an aspiring actress who Nat stumbles upon one day in a restaurant. And we also find out just what's happening with Freya from the book Freya in the 1960s. This is written in the very accessible style that Anthony Quinn has. I found it a fast read. I really enjoy Quinn's prose, and yet I do feel as though there was something sensational towards the end that wasn't necessary for the story that was being told. However, I was really impressed with the way the 1960s were presented. I don't know much about London, so London here was basically like a fantastical world to me. It was probably exactly like this. I don't know. Or it could have been nothing like this. I honestly do not know. But I do know that I enjoyed this story. Obviously there was that sensational bit, but I do like exploring Quinn's works. I should probably have read more of them by now. Next, I read The Diary of a Bookseller by Shaun Bythell. This is just what it says on the tin. I read it for Non-Fiction November, as I did The Rebel and the Gender Games. Non-Fiction November is run by Olive of A Book Olive. And anyway, this book is funny. I think that anybody who works in retail can appreciate what Shaun Bythell's going on about. And also, he has people knocking him down on prices, or trying to. People come into the charity shop and try to do that all the time. So I heartily sympathised with this writer. With this reader, with this bookseller. If somebody in your life likes books, works in retail, get them this book, because you'll have a laugh. Next, I read Transcription by Kate Atkinson. This was a strange one to read just after coming out of Eureka. This month has become a bit heavy on the historical fiction. Transcription is set in the 1940s, the 1950s, and to some extent in the 1980s, and follows the character of Juliet, who is employed by MI5 to transcribe events that she hears through microphones. And basically, it's this whole culture of spying and espionage that you don't actually realise is about spying and espionage because it's extremely subtle. I think it helps to have a knowledge of World War II and everything that was going on in this country at the time. Once again, it's a London-centric novel, and I just really enjoyed it. It was short enough it was short enough that you wanted it to be longer, but also you felt as though if it was longer you might lose something. I felt as though you could have an entire series about this character, you know, just really unpicking their life and finding out just what actually happened. This is a book that merits rereading. Really, really enjoyed this one. Next, I read The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anna Marie Crowhurst. This book is set in the 17th century and follows the character of Ursula Flight from birth until adulthood. And it is another brilliant book. I was really lucky this month to read some great fiction. I nearly did put this book down simply because I wanted to speed through loads of books this month, and I couldn't do that. This book I found hilarious. This had some classic British humour in there, and I really like the fact that Ursula is aspiring to be a playwright, something that is looked down upon. She's from somewhat a wealthy family, and her family have ideals for her. Her father wishes to teach her where other women aren't being taught at the time because it's thought that their brains will melt. And Ursula really goes against all of this and tries to build her own destiny, and things kind of get in the way, but she gets past them, and it's just a fantastic read. And it reminded me somewhat of classic fiction because it was very much an adventure, really. I had no idea where the story was going to go, what was going to happen next. And, you know, there were these excerpts that were in the diary format, they were in script format, and it all really worked to create this hugely impressive narrative that I'm really glad that I read it this time of year as well. I felt it was really suited for the November going into December time. Finally, I listened to Weird Sisters by Terry Pratchett. Basically, I like to listen to stuff whilst I'm writing, and I've not listened to any of the Terry Pratchett books that I've downloaded off Audible, so I thought, well, we'll have to get one down, and I like the stories of the witches. This really takes off Shakespeare and Macbeth. There's like links to Hamlet in there. There's also witches and, you know, ghosts and all that weird stuff you expect from Terry Pratchett, but it's just written, again, in a humorous style that I think we're very much accustomed to in Britain. Well, if you know the plot of Macbeth, you know the story. It was also strange the way that this book linked to my reading of Ursula Flight with someone wishing to be a playwright. And I find these stories hilarious, but I don't know that I'd be able to read them because I like listening to them, and I think the humour works best when it's read to you, if that makes any sense. I know that other people have tried reading it and not enjoyed it, and I've said, well, try the audiobook, and that's worked for them as well, so it's one of those things. But yes, I'm looking forward to going on and reading more. Did I enjoy this as much as Mort? No. I have yet to listen to a Terry Pratchett book that I have enjoyed as much as Mort, but this is still one of the top ones for me, out of the, 6 that I've listened to. There we go, them's the books. I had actually intended to read a lot more this month, but it didn't come to anything because I spent the last fortnight writing. I mean, what can you do, really, when just the writing book hits you? If you have read any of these books and would like to discuss them, please feel free to do so in the comments. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, that is all.